Okay, great. So if this is okay with everyone, we shall begin. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this talk. It's part of the Middle East Today series at the University of Texas in Austin. We are situated here and supported by the Middle East Studies Department. And my name is Nahid Siamdous. I'm an assistant professor in media and Middle Eastern Studies here at the Department of Middle Eastern Studies. So today we're here to learn more about and discuss the Turkish elections of this past May, very late in May, that brought Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan back, re-elected him back to the presidency. And it was a somewhat hotly contested presidential elections. He defeated opposition leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu by a somewhat narrow margin of 52%, about to 47%, 48%. And so we're here to discuss, what does his re-election into a third decade at the helm in Turkish politics mean for Turkey? What does it mean for the region? As I speak, I also want to acknowledge being here at the Department of Middle Eastern Studies and being with people who care about the Middle East, that I acknowledge that there's a lot of suffering going on in the Middle East at the moment. And I thank you for your attention right now. I know we're all a little distracted paying attention to what's happening in Israel and Palestine. So before I proceed, I also want to talk a little bit about the format here. So we have our participants here on Zoom, but we also have a room of people joining us together here to participate in this room together. For the Q&A section, if any people in the room have questions, please just let me know, and I might have you walk up to the computer or just relay your question to the speakers. We are so lucky to have with us today Dr. Ayça Alemdaroğlu, who serves as the Associate Director of the Program on Turkey and is a research scholar at the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law at Stanford University. She specializes in political sociology. Her research has delved into topics including nationalism, Kurdish politics, social and political inequality, gender politics, social change, and youth issues and the Middle East. Her most recent publication is a co-edited book entitled Kurds in Dark Times, New Perspectives on Violence and Resistance. She earned her PhD from the University of Cambridge, and prior to joining Stanford, Dr. Alemdaroğlu worked as an assistant professor of research in sociology at Northwestern University. Thank you very much for being here. We also have, we're very lucky to have Dr. Kim Guiler as a discussant. She's an analyst in the Department of State's Office of Analysis for Near East Affairs. She's an expert on democratic backsliding and populist authoritarianism, and has lectured on the topic at multiple universities. Prior to joining the Department of State, Kim was a fellow with the Middle East Initiative at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, and she holds a PhD in government from the University of Texas at Austin. So welcome back, Kim. So without further ado, since this is a fairly short session, we're going to try to keep it to about an hour 15 minutes. Dr. Alemdaroğlu, I very much look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Nahid. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks for everyone for coming. I know this is like really hard and busy days for all of us trying to follow up what's going on in Gaza. So I'm really sort of indebted to everyone who is joining us. And thanks for Kim for accepting to serve as a discussant in this session. And also of course, the Middle East Studies Program or Center for hosting me and all the staff there. So what I plan to do today is just discuss briefly. Here's the plan. Sorry. the historical background of politics and elections in Turkey. I'm not sure to what extent our audience knows the context. I know some people do. I see my professor from Turkey who's joining, but I just want to take it from basics to give you a little background. I'm gonna then talk about the elections, the 2023 elections in particular. I will talk about a little bit the puzzling parts of it, and perhaps the disappointment or post-election blues that many analysts and people who care about human rights and democracy in Turkey had following the elections. And then I want to talk about beyond elections, what can we expect and what are some of the lessons that we hopefully learned in the last election in Turkey. So Turkey's history of elections is a long one. It goes back, of course, to the last century of the Ottoman Empire, 19th century. But when we talk about the democratic history, we usually started from the 1946, where we had first multi-party general elections. It wasn't a democratic elections because it was an open vote and secret count. So it's not one of those democratic ones, but starting from 50, we have first democratic elections, and then, but of course, Turkey's sort of history of elections and democracy is very much sort of paused by military interventions. We have one in 1960, and then we have returned to elections in between 60 and 71, and different governments, dominant party, mostly the Justice Party. Then we have 1971, another military memorandum. Between 70s and 1980, we have elections, coalition governments and minority governments. And 1980, it's intercepted again. There's a new constitution with the 10% threshold. So basically trying to prevent small parties from being represented in the parliament. Between 80 and 91, we have a dominant party ANAP ruling. And then between 1991 and 2000, we have again a period, a decade of coalition governments. And since 2002, we have the Justice and Development Party of Erdoğan in power. So this is just briefly, just to say that, Turkey's history of elections starts much before, and it's like a mixed bag of military interventions and elections and different periods of democratic experience. So here's an interesting, excuse me, here. So I think this is an interesting graph to think about when we think about Turkey's current moment. Many analysts tend to think that, Turkey had its most democratic time when Erdoğan was elected.
Ayça, I'm so sorry, we can't actually see your screen.
Oh, not at all.
No, maybe I need to remove this pin. Let me see. Can you share now?
I'm sharing.
Okay, it's not about the pin. No, we're not seeing it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Maybe try unsharing and then sharing again.
Okay. Okay. How is it now?
Yep, now we can see it.
And can I go to presenter view? What do you see now? You see?
We see your graph and we see the thumbnails to the left, but honestly, they're so small, they don't interfere with our viewing of the slide.
Okay. So you just see the slides and the thumbnails. Okay.
Exactly. And right now we see rights and freedoms in Turkey.
Okay, great. All right, sorry about that. I was just in the first two slides, I gave you the plan and then the historical context, which I mentioned, and then rights and freedoms. And this is I think an interesting graph to think about Turkey's current politics. As I said, some analysts tend to think that Turkey's most democratic period is the one that was elected when President Erdoğan elected in 2002, and Turkey was like swiftly trying to, make the legal changes, democratic changes in its legal framework as the most democratic period. But when you look at it in a long term, and this is data from Freedom House, you see like the 70s, when Turkey is known like as the most like which has a civil fight between the leftist and rightist groups, is according to Freedom House data, is the most democratic period. So I think it's really interesting to think about like the current moment and how the decline, here you see like 1980 coup, and then 1997 there's another memorandum, and then there's it's going up, but then starting from 2004 actually 13 it's just a decline. So this is just to give you some perspective. So in the 2023 elections, we have two races. One is the presidential race. The other one is the parliamentary race. We see, Erdoğan, who has been ruling the country since 2002, running for the third presidential race against Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. They both have their own, like electoral alliances. Erdoğan, is the leader for People's Alliance, and Kılıçdaroğlu is the Nation Alliance. So we had two elections. Many people know Erdoğan, but less people know Kılıçdaroğlu. He's been the chair of the CHP, Republicans People Party. He has, most significantly, his, known as some people call it Gandhi Kemal, after the Mahatma Gandhi, anti-colonial, non-violent resistance leader in India, for doing organizing this march and leading this march, what we call the Justice March in 2017, against all the human rights violations and anti-democratic practices by President Erdoğan. And he's also from a Kurdish descent, so he's also embraced by as a Piro Kemal. As you see on the right-hand side, Erdoğan asking him how he can become a Piro, which is a meaning a leader in Alevism, that is a respectful leader. Like a vice person. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu is an interesting figure. He comes from, he was a bureaucrat in most of his career before becoming the chair of CHP, and he doesn't sort of hide that, and he has proud in that kind of a background, but he's also like very open about his family and his his kitchen, his means, from how different it is from President Erdoğan's like really extravagant lifestyle and all that. And he builds the campaign on that. I mean, because there was a lot of media blockage on his campaign, he basically did these like very simple movies, movies in his kitchen, basically disseminating his message through these, sort of kitchen videos, and that was really embraced by young people. This became his kitchen became a background for Zoom. So he's an interesting figure, and many people in the opposition actually appreciated his campaign. I think it was overall, maybe not in terms of the results, but it was a surprising campaign for many of us in Turkey, who is longing for a more inclusive, democratic message. He also.
Did you mean to move to the next slide, or are you still on the graph?
I moved to the.
You didn't move to that? So we're still seeing the rights and freedoms in Turkey graph. Maybe if you click on the thumbnails, maybe they'll, because I can see the rights and freedoms. There you go. Now you move to the next one. I mean, to two from there. So we skipped the one with the faces of Erdoğan and Kılıçdaroğlu.
This is really weird. I don't know why this is doing it. It's doing this. How about now?
We can now see the cartoons, and in the middle, Kılıçdaroğlu.
The issue is that when I do that, I don't see. Let me see how I could fix it. I apologize. I wish we had the chance to.
That's okay. I mean, what are you seeing on your screen?
Okay, so you see now the slides, right?
Yes, we were always seeing the slides. We just hadn't moved on from the graph slide. So now we see the one with the two cartoons and in the middle.
All right. Okay, what I'm gonna do is okay. All right. I think this will fix the problem. I'll just open my notes in a different one. Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you.
Okay, and then in addition to being that kind of figure, he had a lot of social policy ideas, promises. If he's elected, he will increase the support for families, free transportation, extra salary. So he had a lot of policy-based sort of campaign promises. Many of them were taken by Erdoğan and turned into his sort of campaign agenda. All right, so and this is the campaign where he says, "Sana söz, I promise you that I will deliver," kind of message. He was not only this sort of grandfatherly figure with a lot of linkage to Turkey's ethnic, minorities and all that, but he also was able to bring 6 parties in the opposition together, which was really a unique experiment for us, and that in itself was really gave hope to a lot of people, fighting for democracy in Turkey. There were major ideological differences in this group, but they were able to write a comprehensive policy platform and produced all these documents that many people criticize for not sort of explained really well to the public, but they were able to get together around the common goal of promising people that they're going to bring the parliamentary system back, which was Turkey became a presidential system in 2017. So it was a very kind of unique experiments in the Turkish political history. There were also conditions that really we thought would be supporting the opposition's cause, which was obviously the Turkey's steady decline in democracy. There are some discussion in the Turkish studies about where it started, but I think starting from 2010. There are all these different turning points, starting with Ergenekon and Balyoz cases, which is the attempt of Erdoğan undoing the military power, and then we have Gezi protests in 2013, which was basically repressed by Erdoğan's government in a mostly violent way. We have ending of the Kurdish peace process, which we thought was an important sort of democratic opening in Turkey, but it was cut, and then which is followed by a wave of repression against the politically engaged Kurds, including the removal of local government officials that were elected from the pro-Kurdish party HDP, and their replacement by government-appointed trustees. And some of you may know that many academics who were critical of this action of the government and the violence in the East found themselves also like criminally charged and sacked from their jobs in Turkey. And of course the mounting repressive climate took a really massive turn for the worse with the 2016 July coup, and then in the emergency context, the martial law context, we had the constitutional referendum, which ended Turkey's parliamentary system and established executive presidency that Erdoğan has been acting in. So if you are interested in these discussions, we have a paper with Sinan Erensu on the dialectics of reform and repression that was published in the Review for Middle East Studies, and there we discussed this, like, where did Turkey turn anti-democratic, where did the decline start kind of argument. Okay. So the economy was also in shambles. Turkey, with the transition to the presidential system, Turkey, we've seen the disregard for the independence of regulatory bodies that were critical to Turkey's economic success in the previous decade. As a result, Turkey's economic performance has steadily gone worse, especially since the 2018 summer, where we saw the national currency lost 40% of its value against the US dollar, and the decline has been continuing since then. There's like a major change in the GDP per capita. We had the peak in 2013, where the GDP per capita was 12,000. It went down to 8,000, which is a major change in people's purchasing power and lives. Today we have a major macroeconomic instability, super high inflation rates, and the depression of central banks' reserves, and high poverty. So, and these many thought would work against Erdoğan in the elections. In addition to that, there was a major earthquake in February, which is like that really showed us like how economic crisis and government crisis are actually merged. There were more than 50,000 people died. The earthquake affected like 13 cities. And that was like an interesting moment. It wasn't just the loss of lives and the government like inability to responded effectively. It was also like this whole idea of like Erdoğan's politics and its basis as this like him in his construction sector as the basis of like Turkey's economic success, and his main policy success is basically shambled, right? With the shattered with what we have seen in February and in the earthquake region. despite this tremendous crisis, double crisis of the economy and the government, we saw Erdoğan, claiming a victory in May 20, in the May elections. This is a graph that shows you the parliamentary election results. As you see, the People's Alliance had 323. So what this shows is that the People's Alliance, the Erdoğan's alliance, basically lost some votes, but still they were able to form the majority in the parliament. They didn't get the 360 seats that many people worried, which would give them the 3/5 of the seats, which is required to amend the constitution, but still like about the simple majority. So in the presidential race, this was Erdoğan got only 49.5%, which I think the first time that he failed to win a majority in the first round of a presidential elections, which can be thought as a success of the opposition. But in the second round, he got, as Nahid was referring, 52% against 47%. So this is an interesting sort of map, I think, which gives you an idea of the patterns of voting in Turkey. And when you look at it, you see like Erdoğan getting votes in rural areas, outside rural areas, and inland, right? When you look at it, roughly 20% of the population live in these like orange, yellow areas, but Erdoğan gets like more than 65% of the votes in that against Kılıçdaroğlu's 35%. So it's mostly a sort of a rural, small city kind of support where he makes a lot of difference against Kılıçdaroğlu. In the remaining like areas where like 80% of the population live, which are the red ones, like the coastal towns, the capital city, Ankara, and then the east, Diyarbakır, and the Kurdish, basically Kurdish majority region, we see Kılıçdaroğlu surpass Erdoğan, getting more than 50% of the popular vote. What is I guess like painful, and we have to think as political scientists, sociologists, like how come that Erdoğan won 10 out of the 11 provinces hit by the earthquake, right? And I think a lot of people are still like writing about it and trying to understand. The other interesting outcome is that we have seen Kılıçdaroğlu got his top 5 votes from the Kurdish majority provinces, and even like surpassing the sort of the city, the Izmir, which is the strongest CHP sort of hold. This is truly an sort of interesting outcome. So one thing that we have seen in the Turkish election is the colossal fail of the pollsters to predict. There were some pollsters who got Erdoğan's vote somewhat close, but most pollsters failed. And we have seen this kind of result in, I think, Brexit as well, but it's we need to sort of think about the methods that they're using, and the pollsters should do it, but there are all these companies that needs to go take an account of what they did wrong. But it's also like we as political scientists, sociologists who depend on these pollsters, we have to think twice about what to base our arguments on. So how did Erdoğan win again? And this is I'm coming to sort of the conclusion. First of all, like many people were saying, oh, elections are actually free but not fair in Turkey. I think I agree with people who say that we neither have free nor fair elections. We have a strong media control by the government. There are so many examples of like how Kılıçdaroğlu didn't have access to major channels, but also like how when he did like the TRT, Turkish Radio Television, which is a state channel, how it's like so unequal for him, like and we talked about this, like 32 hours of Erdoğan against 32 minutes of Kılıçdaroğlu just during the last week of election campaign. So these are like and there are many sort of examples of research that sort of gives evidence to this. So use of state resources, Erdoğan and his ministers, unlimited deployment of state resources. They run their campaigns. There were many ministers who were running for the parliament, and they used full force of their ministries. There were a lot of election handouts leading up to the election. There's like a huge fiscal expansion. The minimum wage was raised, early retirement was given to millions of people, the government expanded hiring, cheap credit to businesses, like free gas, subsidized gas to homeowners, and so on. So I think that those were very, very targeted sort of handouts that helped Erdoğan won again. There was also electoral violence, which is, I think, a case for saying that there are no free elections. There were, especially in the Kurdish region, there were attacks to the People's Democratic Party, and even the CHP sort of vice president candidate was subject to violence in Erzurum. There's continuing oppression of the opposition politicians. There's the HDP, the Pro-Kurdish Party's closure case. Demirtas, Selahattin Demirtas, who was the former leader of the party, in jail with number of former MPs. And there are mass detentions in Kurdish cities, like, just a few days before the elections, of the lawyers, journalists. So we can talk about opposition weaknesses, and many people do, unfortunately, like all the sort of democratic sort of intellectuals and forces of Turkey just turn to opposition and, sort of criticizing what opposition failed to do in the elections. But I want to talk about beyond elections, because when we talk about elections, we just focus on, a little bit before and a little bit after elections. And we have this, like, especially in America, political science context, we just take elections as when we talk about like democracy, free, fair, all that. But I think what we're missing, and I think just like focusing on elections doesn't really explain the success of Erdoğan, that to an extent it explains it to an extent, but I think beyond the elections we can talk about the larger power network and how Erdoğan really built that power network over the years. And what is in there? We are talking about state capture, firm control of the states, the erosion of checks and balances and the rule of law. We're talking about the intertwined organizational authority and tools of the state and the party that Erdoğan employs in elections and beyond. I think the most important thing that not everyone talks about or thinks about is the political economy, how his party creates resources and distributes them. There's a really great paper just published in the Journal of Democracy by Senem Düzgit, and her co-authors talks about this very well. If you're interested in reading a little bit more about the political economy, how the state capture and market capture, basically created this power network. We also explained that in the context of the Kurdish region, and how, you know, Erdoğan dismissed those mayors, and how he sort of use those municipalities to create resources and distribute resources for election purposes and beyond. Another paper with Sultan Tepe, if you're interested, that's also published in Journal of Democracy. And there's constant meaning production for political gains. I'm just gonna jump here just to show in this election, there was this, like, you know, rebranding Erdoğan as this Top Gun, you know, figure, emphasis on national security and defense industry. These are the things that always work since 2015, when Erdoğan lost the party's majority in the June elections. This always, like, bringing the national security issue forward helps Erdoğan rally votes behind him. And I think that meaning production is change. Here in this election, we have seen a lot of this techno-nationalism, like Turkey producing, you know, cars, Turkey producing, like, you know, drone, you know, carriers, all that really were prominent in this meaning production. So let me, one thing we also need to think about is, like, this massive political organization. Like, here's some numbers for those who are not familiar with the context. Like, Erdoğan's party has like 11 million people. Turkey's population is about 85 million, and 11 million of them are members of the party. I mean, you can say some of these people, you don't even know if they're members. Maybe they're just, like, written, you know, by their relatives, but still, like, this is a massive structure. So when you think about this sort of, you know, combination of economy and state, you're thinking about the organizational capacity. I mean, you know, the disappointment of this last election grows even more, right? I mean, and then the question then becomes that, like, do elections really matter in the entrenched autocracy, right? Can the state institutions ever resist Erdoğan? Or, I mean, there are some moments of this resistance that we have seen in the last elections, that, you know, the judiciary not complying with every demand of the Erdoğan government, but it's very, very little. So, so the prevailing issues for beyond elections is the economy. You know, there's a new term and return to economic orthodoxy, but many economists are worried about the continuation of this policy, and also, like, you know, to what extent these policies will bring welfare to the wider population that is really impoverished, like middle classes. So there's a Syrian refugee issue, which is a very, very polarizing and important issue in Turkey. The opposition promised to send Syrians back home, which was, I think, a very, very, you know, not a very valid or doable policy, but they went for, like, you know, they support, like, sending everyone back home without really having a plan and what that means, and without taking any lesson from the history that, you know, doing this cannot be, you know, it's probably not possible, you know, at this moment. So you know, the Syrian issue will, I think, keep on informing the Turkish politics and the polarization, the polls in politics. So the state of the opposition is another issue that we need to talk. I think the worst possible thing happened, opposition. They not only, you know, lost, but they're also dissolved, and how they're going to get back together, whether they will form a you know, credible opposition against Erdoğan in the upcoming elections in 2024 March local elections is still a question for me. So one thing that I guess like I could just finish is there's a lot of, I said, disappointment, hopelessness, and apathy among the opposition supporters. And there are a lot of people, right? 48%. And if you add the third candidate, presidential candidate, which got 5%, it's, majority of Turkey is like, opposes this current government and current regime. So a lot of people are, I'm worried personally, is like exiting slowly the politics. I mean, there are like, according Albert Tishman says, there are three modes of like political thinking and behavior. One is the voice, the other one is the exit. And I think when there's no voice, a lot of people are exiting the system and turning apathetic. And we have political opinion polls that show that people don't want to, they wouldn't vote if there were elections now. So they're turning, losing their hope from the system. I'll just end up here. I know I passed my time a little bit, so I'm ready for Kim's comments and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alemdaroğlu. This was a really great presentation. So much food for thought for us here. And handing over to Kim. Looking forward to your discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much. I thought that this was really great. You covered a lot of territory at the beginning with giving some historical context and going into specifically leading up to the elections and how to view the elections in the context of Turkey today. I think that the way I'd like to use my time, I have kind of two sort of lines of questions. One related specifically to the talk, and then one trying to tie it into current events. At the beginning, we mentioned the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I had a question that kind of ties your talk into this as well. So first, I had a question about the opposition. So you talked about how in these 2023 Turkish general elections, the opposition led by Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu's Nation Alliance had several things working in its favor. So there was the country's worst economic crisis in 2 decades, and fallout over catastrophic elections in February. And it seemed at the time that these things would really help the opposition. I think the opposition also viewed their chances as good. And you mentioned the polling data that showed that Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu really, it looked like his coalition was going to do well. Yet, as you discussed, Erdoğan surprised his critics, pundits, the pollsters by securing a 3rd term and extending his 20-year rule for another 5 years. So I wanted to see if we could talk about this a little bit more. You mentioned the declining, importance of elections perhaps in this authoritarian space, but what conditions do you think would allow the opposition to be more successful in the future? Or, why do you think that these conditions, you mentioned the uneven playing field. I guess what I'm trying to get at, are there any conditions, given these extreme conditions on the ground that should have benefited the opposition, are there any conditions that you think would allow the opposition to be successful or more successful? And I know that success is maybe a challenging concept in a sort of authoritarian space, but and then on the flip side, what would it take for us to see Erdoğan start to lose support if an earthquake and a delayed government response and an economic crisis didn't do it? Then what would we need to see in order to see people losing their attachment even more to Erdoğan? So I want to open this up, and sorry, I forgot to say at the beginning that I need to say that any views that I express don't represent or don't necessarily represent the views of the State Department or the United States. I have to give like a boilerplate when I give talks. But yeah, I would like to open it back up to you, Ayça, to hear your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Kim. Can I just ask you, you mentioned at the beginning that you were going to discuss, have a comment about regional developments. Do you want to mention that as well, or come back to that?
Yeah, whatever works best for Ayça. I can give both questions if that's better.
Sure. Yes, please.
Yeah, so in addition, you mentioned how at moments when Erdoğan feels threatened, so, after 2015, and, leading up to this 2023 general election, that he leans on national security and defense. And in addition, I would add that he also sort of leans into this kind of us versus them language, and this seems to sort of help him. He's become, more and more populist, and he's been leaning into, this us versus them, and it has seemed, from what I've read in the news and in my own research, to sort of unite people around him. And so, related to this, I remember also after, the Arab uprisings, language uniting the plight of Turks with the greater Muslim victimization worldwide. This is something that's appealed to folks. And I wonder if you expect to see something similar with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Do you think that we'll see a rise in us versus them language? Can you talk a little bit about how the Turkish public are perceiving the conflict? And do you think that this crisis will help Erdoğan? Will he be able to use this to unite folks around him?
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. Great questions. So about elections, so elections is really like an important part of Erdoğan's sort of power, right? He always had elections. He was always, he always gets elected, right? He does well with elections, and he legitimizes his power in the eyes of the world, being there despite all the human rights violations and etc. With the fact that he's elected by his people, and that's really, really important, right? So he can't do without the elections. We have to have elections, right? But then, his elections, elections can also loosen power, right? So all the maneuvering, all the, political strategizing is of him is around how do we sort of contain elections? How do we get, win elections, basically? And they, as I said, they have a lot of sort of economic and political authority, like power and resources that are sort of invested in winning elections. So in that kind of context, it's really hard for the opposition to win elections, right? Also, there are all these problems with within the opposition bloc, right? There are ideological differences that I mentioned. And all that. So I think, but the opposition won elections in 2019 in the mayoral in Istanbul and Ankara. So that's an important sort of historical background. But also, even though that happened, I'm not sure how they're gonna pull it off in the upcoming elections in March, because Erdoğan takes good lessons out of failures, whereas I don't think opposition always does, right? So I can't say much, but I think what would have been better for the opposition to do, I guess, resolving this issue of the ideological problems. The Kurdish issue is being one, to maybe for the CHP to be more open about that and follow that through. The other issue could be, in addition to that, maybe try to have a larger coalition, including the pro-Kurdish party, basically delivering to this idea that we are here to bring back democracy and do it accordingly, to including different parties. But there are, of course, other other sort of suggestions that one can bring. Your other question was about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and how that could sort of strengthen Erdogan's hand and like using this us versus them, us, Turkey versus the West kind of encounter or that kind of discourse. I mean, Palestinian issue has always been a very fruitful issue within the Turkish context, and it's not just for Erdogan's voters, but for everyone. I mean, Turks are for Palestinian rights. I mean, it's from left to right. So I don't think there will be too much of a diversion or disagreements among the Turkish public about supporting Palestinian rights. But I think that's while Erdogan is trying to there's this process of there has been a process of rapprochement with Israel. I think this will make it a little bit more difficult, and Erdogan's new sort of political persona after the elections, which is like, let's make peace with everyone, and I think it's going to just make it a more difficult, especially, and also given that Turkey supports Hamas and some leaders of Hamas resides in Turkey. I mean, I think it will open a lot of questions for Turkey in the international sphere.
Thank you so much. I would like to open it up to our participants here and on Zoom if there are any questions for Dr. Alemdaroğlu, or otherwise I can also ask my question. I'll just give it a minute. Maybe not quite a minute. Some of our students had to sort of slip away to classes. But I guess my question is, I remember seeing this one very poignant scene on television of, Erdogan literally, I mean, you talked about election handouts and, of him literally handing out cash to, I mean, he was just standing there sort of handing out the bills to supporters. It was some kind of election campaign, and which, in a lot of other settings would just be really a jarring image of, straight sort of transfer from cash to vote. But I'm just wondering, are we thinking of this the wrong way? Have we come to a point in Turkey where indeed, this is, given the state of the economy, election handouts are what make elections, might make a victory in elections, and what kind of democratic ideal are we aiming for, and does that exclude the sort of quid pro quo? I don't know if this is kind of a strange or outrageous question to ask, but I'm just wondering what, that image to me, and it was so, it just seemed like such a normal thing for Erdogan to do. I'm just curious if you could comment on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's that kind of handout became the part of Turkish, political operation, right? I mean, it's when you really narrow the political speech, when you narrow the politics itself, there's not much, I mean, for people basically, and they think just like getting these cash handouts or or tea, he was like throwing tea from, maybe you missed that was like the most disgusting image for many of us. Then those kind of things become like the politics itself in a context where there are no rights, there's no freedom of expression is like severely cut. Unfortunately, what this kind of politics or what this kind of politics does is just further narrow the political context for everyone. And also, we have to bear in mind, Turkish people are impoverished, right? I mean, especially from 2008, but so there's a lot of like people who appreciate that kind of like gesture, to any gesture talking about Kurdish rights, this and that, like more sort of on, you know, larger democratic goals in the country. I mean, one thing that I think happening and is that both the economic aid and the political sort of repression, they target certain groups, right? And that makes, I think, Erdoğan really a very, very clever politician. So not everyone is impacted from the economic crisis equally. Not everyone impacted from political repression equally. So the ones, so I think that's that becomes the new political game. Like, how do we sort of diversify the population, and where do we get more votes? And that happened to be the rural population. That happened, but it's not just like the rural population. He plays the same game with big business, right? How he sort of co-ops big business, and then these like small and medium sort of manufacturers, they like different policies. So unfortunately, I mean, part of the game is what you're referring to, really handing out like cash and throwing tea.
Really interesting. Really reminds me of Ahmadinejad's election in Iran, which was also, you know, really very much sort of played to those kinds of constituencies. Any other questions from our participants? May I ask just one last question? Do you link what's happening in Turkey? You know, there's a lot of talk about rising authoritarianism in the region and all around the world, has been for a few years now. And I wonder, do you see what's happening in Turkey linked at all to this general sort of, you know, atmosphere wherein democratic rights are crushed, and, you know, we see democratic backsliding, not just in, you know, regions where we might potentially expect it, but, you know, in European countries and, you know, during the Trump era, certainly also in the US. And so I wonder, do you see this, you know, the rise of greater authoritarianism in Turkey as being linked to these processes in the region and the world, or do you think we have to look at Turkey sort of separately?
I think like Turkey is in the middle of it. I think Turkey is like the really innovating some of these like authoritarian methods, and I think we can't really think of Turkey, you know, apart from what's going on in the region. I mean, there are a number of scholars that show that, you know, there's some learning from among the authoritarians. We know that. We just like published an issue in the MERP issue about transnational repression, how these authoritarian leaders depend on each other to go after their dissidents. So I think it's part of it, and unfortunately, like Erdoğan is an innovative part of that wave.
Great, thank you so much. And I just want to correct something I said about the backsliding in the U.S. happening during the Trump era. It started there, but it's, you know, obviously been happening over the last just quite recently as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Alemdaroğlu. Thank you so much, Dr. Guiler, for being here with us. Thank you for your presentation, Ayça, giving us more insight into the re-election of Erdoğan, and really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, and thank you to all the you know, participants. Thanks.
Thank you.
Always fun to come back to UT, even.
It's wonderful to, and I know, Doctor, I'm just going to stop the recording.